If you've been gardening for a while, you've probably heard people say that deadheading is one of the easiest ways to keep flowers blooming longer. And for plenty of plants, that's absolutely true. But here's something many gardeners don't realize. Not every flower actually benefits from having its faded blooms removed. After nearly 30 years of gardening, one lesson has become clearer to me than almost anything else. The most enjoyable gardens aren't necessarily the ones that demand constant attention. They're the ones filled with plants that continue looking beautiful while asking very little in return. Over the years, I've intentionally chosen flowers that provide long-lasting beauty without requiring me to spend every weekend walking around with a pair of pruning shears. Part of that approach is learning which plants are happier when you simply leave them alone. Some flowers continue producing blooms without any deadheading at all. Others develop attractive seed heads that feed birds, shelter beneficial insects, or add texture and beauty throughout autumn and winter. In many cases, removing the faded flowers actually takes away one of the plant's best features. So before you spend another afternoon cutting off every spent bloom in your garden, let me show you 11 flowers that I purposely never deadhead, and why you may want to rethink doing it yourself. A few of these choices might surprise you. Let's begin with one of my favorite summer perennials. Number 1. Coneflowers. Could I remove the faded blooms to encourage a few additional flowers? Absolutely, but I intentionally choose not to. Instead, I leave every flower head standing once the petals fade, because those seed heads become an important food source for goldfinches and many other songbirds later in the season. One of my favorite sights each year is watching birds balance on those dried seed heads during late summer and fall. If I leave them standing long enough, they'll continue attracting birds well into winter, adding life and movement to the garden long after most flowers have disappeared. Coneflowers earn their place in my garden for plenty of other reasons too. Once established, they're remarkably drought-tolerant, thrive in full sun, and provide nectar for bees and butterflies throughout much of the summer. Even after flowering finishes, the sturdy seed heads continue contributing texture and structure to the landscape. For me, it's the best of both worlds. The wildlife benefits, and the garden continues looking interesting for months. To be honest, I actually enjoy the appearance of the seed heads. I usually leave them exactly where they are until they eventually become dark, weathered, and no longer add much to the display. Until then, I'm perfectly happy to let the birds enjoy them while the seeds are still available. Number 2. Sedum. Sedum is another perennial that actually becomes more attractive after the flowers have finished blooming. Those soft pink flower clusters gradually transform into rich shades of burgundy, copper, and bronze as autumn approaches, giving the plant an entirely different kind of beauty later in the season. When winter finally arrives, those dried flower heads often collect frost or snow, creating some of the most beautiful scenes anywhere in the garden. If I remove them during late summer, I'd miss months of seasonal interest. The dried flower heads also provide shelter for beneficial insects during the colder months, which gives me another reason to leave everything exactly where it is until spring cleanup. Rather than reaching for my pruners as soon as flowering ends, I simply enjoy watching the plant continue changing as the seasons progress. To me, varieties like Autumn Joy Sedum are true four-season perennials. Fresh chartreuse foliage emerges in spring. Soon afterward, rounded green flower buds begin adding texture. As summer fades into autumn, the blooms deepen into beautiful warm colors that remain attractive for weeks. Then winter arrives, covering those sturdy seed heads with frost or snow and giving the garden another completely different look. It's one of those plants that never seems to lose its ornamental value, no matter what time of year you're looking at it. Number 3. Hydrangeas. Hydrangeas are another group of plants where reaching for the pruners too soon can do more harm than good. Many gardeners assume every faded bloom should be removed as soon as it begins losing color, but with several hydrangea varieties, those old flower heads continue serving an important purpose long after flowering has finished. On types that bloom on old wood, such as many bigleaf and oakleaf hydrangeas, The dried flower clusters help protect the developing buds tucked just beneath them. Those buds are already preparing next year's flowers, and the spent blooms act like a small layer of natural insulation during cold weather. Removing them too early can leave those delicate buds more exposed to winter damage. There's another reason I leave mine alone. As the flowers age, they don't simply fade away. Instead, they gradually take on beautiful antique shades of soft green, dusty pink, tan, burgundy, or parchment brown, depending on the variety. Those muted colors often remain attractive throughout autumn and even into winter, adding texture when many other plants have already disappeared. I usually wait until late winter or early spring before removing the old flower heads. By then, it's much easier to see where healthy new buds are beginning to swell, making pruning both safer and more accurate. Waiting a little longer protects the plant while also allowing me to enjoy months of extra seasonal beauty. Number 4. Hellebores. Hellebores are a little different because many gardeners don't grow them for the flowers alone. After the petals begin fading, the colorful sepals often remain on the plant for weeks or even months, continuing to provide ornamental value long after the true flowers have finished. Because of that, there's really no reason to rush outside and deadhead them. Those fading blooms continue adding color to the garden, while the plant quietly shifts its energy toward producing seed. If you're hoping your hellebores will spread naturally through the garden, leaving the flowers in place gives them the opportunity to self-seed. Over time, you may discover young seedlings appearing nearby, creating larger drifts of plants with very little effort on your part. Even if you don't want additional seedlings, removing the old blooms immediately offers very little benefit. Instead, I simply leave everything alone until it's time for the usual seasonal cleanup. At that point, it's easy to tidy the plant while allowing the fresh new growth to become the main attraction. Sometimes doing less really is the better choice. Number 5. Agastache. Agastache is another perennial that continues earning its place in the garden long after peak bloom has passed. Throughout summer, its nectar-rich flowers are constantly visited by bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, and many other pollinators. As the season progresses and the blooms begin drying, the upright seed spikes remain attractive while providing food for birds later in the year. Those tall stems also add movement and structure to the winter garden, especially after they're dusted with frost or a light snowfall. Another advantage of leaving the old stems standing is that many beneficial insects use the hollow stalks as shelter during the colder months. If every stem is cut down immediately after flowering, those insects lose valuable overwintering habitat. I prefer waiting until early spring before cutting the plant back. That way, the stems continue supporting wildlife while adding texture to the garden during a season when ornamental interest can be harder to find. Agastache has another quality I really appreciate. It's one of those dependable perennials that asks for very little while giving so much in return. Its long flowering season, drought tolerance once established, and constant pollinator activity make it a plant that's worth enjoying long after the flowers have finished their main display. Sometimes the garden is every bit as beautiful after blooming as it is during peak flowering, and Agastache is a perfect example of that. Number 6. Hardy Hibiscus. Hardy hibiscus is another perennial that doesn't need constant deadheading to put on an impressive display. Unlike many flowering plants that rely on spent blooms being removed to keep producing, hardy hibiscus naturally continues forming new flower buds throughout its blooming season. Each blossom only lasts a single day, but the plant is constantly replacing old flowers with fresh ones. Because of that, there's very little benefit to removing every faded bloom. In fact, I usually let the old flowers fall away on their own. The plant takes care of the cleanup without much help from me, allowing me to spend my time on other gardening jobs instead. As the season winds down, the seed pods that develop add another layer of interest to the plant. While some gardeners remove them for a tidier appearance, I enjoy watching the plant complete its natural life cycle. The sturdy stems also remain standing well into winter, giving the garden a bit of structure after many other perennials have disappeared. Once spring arrives and new shoots begin emerging from the base, that's when I cut away the old stems to make room for fresh growth. Waiting until then keeps maintenance simple while allowing the plant to provide visual interest for much longer. Number 7. Baptisia. Baptisia is one of those perennials that becomes more interesting as the seasons change. After the flowers fade, they give way to attractive seed pods that gradually mature into deep charcoal or black, depending on the variety. As autumn breezes begin moving through the garden, those dry pods create a gentle rattling sound that's become one of the little details I look forward to every year. It's something many visitors notice the first time they walk past the plant. Besides their ornamental value, the seed pods also add texture to fall arrangements if you enjoy bringing natural materials indoors. Removing them immediately after flowering would mean missing one of the plant's most distinctive features. Another reason I avoid deadheading Baptisia is that mature plants develop a naturally attractive shape all on their own. The rounded form stays neat without much intervention, and once established, Baptisia is remarkably drought-tolerant and long-lived. Rather than constantly pruning it, I simply allow the plant to progress through each stage of the season exactly as nature intended. Number 8. Joe-Pye weed. If your goal is attracting pollinators, few native perennials work harder than Joe-Pye weed. Throughout summer, its large flower clusters become magnets for butterflies, bees, and countless other beneficial insects. Once blooming ends, however, the plant's value doesn't stop there. The drying flower heads remain attractive for months and eventually produce seeds that provide food for birds later in the year. The tall stems also create valuable overwintering habitat for many beneficial insects, making them worth leaving in place until spring. Another reason I don't deadhead Joe-Pye weed is its impressive winter presence. Those tall seed heads catch frost beautifully on cold mornings, adding height and texture to the landscape when many gardens would otherwise appear empty. It's a reminder that a garden doesn't have to be filled with colorful flowers to remain beautiful. Sometimes structure alone creates just as much visual appeal. By waiting until early spring to cut everything back, I give wildlife a little extra help while enjoying months of additional seasonal interest. It's a simple choice that benefits both the garden and the creatures that depend on it. Number 9. Ornamental Alliums. Many ornamental alliums are grown just as much for their seed heads as they are for their flowers. After the colorful blooms fade, the perfectly rounded seed heads remain standing on tall, sturdy stems for weeks, or even months. Those sculptural shapes bring a completely different kind of beauty to the garden. In fact, many people intentionally dry them for flower arrangements or decorative displays because they hold their form so well. Out in the garden, they continue adding architectural interest long after flowering has ended. Depending on the variety, birds may also feed on the seeds as they mature, providing another reason to leave the stems standing. I especially enjoy seeing the seed heads glowing in the evening sunlight or sparkling after an early morning frost. Removing them immediately would shorten the season of interest by several months. Instead, I leave them exactly where they are until they naturally begin breaking down, or it's time for spring cleanup. Sometimes, the faded seed heads become just as eye-catching as the flowers themselves. Number 10. Astilbe. Astilbe is one of those perennials that continues to earn its place in the garden long after the colorful blooms have faded. As the flower plumes mature, they gradually dry into soft, feathery seed heads that remain surprisingly attractive for months. Instead of immediately turning brown and unattractive, they often develop warm shades of tan, bronze, or creamy beige that blend beautifully with the autumn landscape. When morning frost settles across the garden, those delicate plumes catch the light in a way that's difficult to ignore. Even without fresh flowers, the plant continues contributing texture and movement to the border. The dried flower heads also provide shelter for small beneficial insects during the colder months, giving them another reason to remain standing until spring. Rather than removing them as soon as flowering ends, I simply allow the plant to transition naturally through the seasons. Once fresh growth begins emerging the following spring, that's the perfect time to trim away the previous year's stems and make room for the new foliage. Sometimes patience rewards you with months of extra beauty that would otherwise disappear far too soon. Number 11. Brunnera. Brunnera is another plant I rarely bother deadheading. Most gardeners grow it primarily for its beautiful heart-shaped foliage rather than its tiny blue flowers. While the spring blooms are certainly charming, they're only a small part of what makes this perennial so valuable. Once flowering is finished, the large leaves continue providing interest for the rest of the growing season. Many varieties feature striking silver patterns that brighten shady corners of the garden long after other spring flowers have faded. Removing the old flowers doesn't noticeably improve the plant's appearance or encourage another significant flush of blooms. Instead, I simply let the flowers finish naturally while allowing the foliage to become the star of the show. As long as the leaves remain healthy, the plant continues doing exactly what I planted it for, bringing texture, contrast, and brightness to shaded beds. Occasionally, I'll remove a damaged or yellowing leaf if necessary, but otherwise, I leave the plant alone until seasonal cleanup. It's another great reminder that not every perennial needs constant attention to perform beautifully. Sometimes, the healthiest thing we can do is simply let the plant grow the way it was designed to. So before you head into the garden with your pruners, here's a quick recap. Leave the seed heads on coneflowers to provide food for birds and add winter interest. Allow sedum flowers to mature naturally so you can enjoy their changing colors and beautiful winter structure. Keep the faded blooms on hydrangeas until late winter or early spring to help protect developing flower buds. Don't rush to deadhead hellebores, since their colorful sepals remain attractive long after flowering. Leave Agastache standing through winter to support pollinators and beneficial insects. Let hardy hibiscus finish its natural flowering cycle without worrying about removing every faded bloom. Allow Baptisia seed pods to mature so you can enjoy their unique appearance and gentle autumn rattle. Keep Joe-Pye weeds standing to support wildlife and provide valuable winter structure. Enjoy the sculptural seed heads of ornamental alliums long after the flowers have disappeared. Leave the graceful plumes of Astilbe in place for extra texture throughout fall and winter, and let Brunnera shift the attention from flowers to its beautiful foliage without unnecessary pruning. The biggest lesson I've learned over the years is that a beautiful garden isn't always the one that's worked on the hardest. Often, it's the one where we understand each plant well enough to know when to step in, and when it's better to simply let nature take its course. Many of these plants continue offering beauty, food, shelter, and seasonal interest long after flowering has finished. By resisting the urge to remove every faded bloom, you're not only saving yourself time, you're also creating a healthier and more wildlife-friendly garden. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Is there a flower in your own garden that you intentionally never deadhead? Or did one of the plants on today's list surprise you? Share your experience in the comments below, because your ideas often help other gardeners discover something new. If you enjoyed this guide, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more practical gardening tips, seasonal planting advice, and low-maintenance ideas to help your garden thrive all year long. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Happy gardening!